Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today our guest is Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yeah. So lately, at least last week, probably longer, all attention was to Israel and US. Now we have to say a conflict with Iran. There is a conflict, or it's essentially annihilation of Iranian war potential. And so Ukraine was on a background for a little while until this week meeting in NATO, where a lot of interesting situation has developed. First of all, it's a warming of U.S., represented by nobody else but President Donald Trump, to Ukraine and Zelensky himself in particular. I think this is a very important development because now I think what is crucial for Trump was that he saw how all NATO members are on the side of Ukraine and Zelensky, and support is incredible, and it's going on and farther and deeper in favor of Ukraine. So maybe that's also played certain thing. Jonathan, what's your take on that?
Well, the take on that is that it's a combination of things. One, President Trump has, as you and I have discussed previously, he's coming to the realization that he is dealing in Russia and in Putin. He is dealing in particular with a man who has no concept of a deal, in the sense that of making a deal that monetarily benefits, because Putin has no need for a monetary benefit. He can basically command whatever resources he wants. So he's that authoritarian. So, and the Russians have no concept of contract either. Contracts mean nothing to them. As I said before, contracts to them are like eggshells made to be broken. So in that case, it's totally expedient for them. So there's that development, the breaking of his own paradigm of how nations ought to relate to each other. And at the same time, Zelensky showed President Trump that, yes, he does have cards to play. And yes, they can still, prevent Russia from winning a military victory. And as such, he also is now appreciating that NATO is a lot more strongly in favor of Ukraine and sees their own best self-interest in resisting Russia. So he does not have to he also recognizes now he does not have to bear the entire burden himself, principally, of supporting Ukraine's war effort against Russia. So he now recognizes that he has more room to maneuver. He has more room to maneuver. He has more flexibility. He can, in fact, deal more forcefully with China and bring them to terms. So this is giving does have enough flexibility of mind and ability to adapt that he is not wedded entirely to his previous strategy. So you're witnessing the evolution of the Trump administration's foreign policy, as well as their strategic doctrine, which is they are taking some aspects of what I've recommended as a strategy of asymmetric response, being able to be unpredictable. His unpredictability in some ways works in his favor, and if properly utilized, can keep his adversaries off balance, which is very important when you're trying to deter someone from aggression. You want to keep them uncertain as to what you will actually do. A lot of observers didn't think that Trump would go so far as to drop bunker busters, which have never before been used on another country, especially to try and take out their nuclear capability. Well, he went ahead and did it. He gave what I call a magnificent head fake in saying, well, you have up to 2 weeks to decide. And then he did. After 2 days, he went ahead and did it anyway. So It's
He's trying to help them to come to the right decision.
right. Yeah, he's encouraging them forcefully, shall we say?
Mhm.
See, I've got a few more. I've got a few more bombs to encourage you with, in case you can't have trouble deciding. So now it's a very interesting situation. The Iranians, for their part, almost comically, have tried to just in their statements they're trying to say how we have slapped the U.S. in the face. Oh, really? How? Uh, and all these other things, declaring how they're trying to spin it, as they say, as much as possible in their favor, trying to convince their own people that they really didn't just get their asses kicked.
Mhm. Well, I guess their victory is amount of fuel needed for a B-2 to reach Iran and come back. So
Right.
thus, they had to spend a certain amount of this.
We made them spend money.
Yeah, they spent a lot of money. Now, I have somewhat unsatisfied feeling that both Israel and U.S. are not gaining politically as much as from what they've done lately from Iran's standpoint. I think, I mean, if Israel and U.S. would give them, say, 48 hours for unconditional capitulation, and of course they wouldn't go for it, so then to continue the job and finish the job and then say, well, here's another 48 hours. How about
Feel
that?
like unconditionally surrendering now? Yeah, that could be an approach. Now, interesting. I also have noted in the reports that the Trump administration is considering offering Iran $30 billion to engage in peaceful construction of peaceful nuclear capability for powering their society. Now that could be, again, this is sort of President Trump is playing off his original approach of using economic inducements to build relationships. So there is that potential. But again, it depends upon if that's dependent upon their declaring their willingness to renounce becoming a nuclear power in the sense of possessing nuclear weapons. And so that has yet to be seen. They're going to try these various approaches until they find the one that actually works.
John,
So,
I
yeah,
believe that economic inducement with the regimes like Iran and Russia, they are not working that well. And no
no,
reason is that if you take Putin, Putin controls all Russian economy,
right.
all Russia itself. So for him, $30 billion or
I mean,
$60 billion is meaningful because he commands probably $1 trillion economy, and everything belongs to him directly or indirectly. So same thing with Ayatollah. Ayatollah is in command of a huge country, 90 million people, and all the economy, and knowing that there is enormous resources like oil and gas, and he still keeps selling that, at least to China. So that's not inducement. What is the $30 billion? I mean, he did what, to couple fix
at,
several
at,
of
at,
his
at,
resources.
at this level and at this point, it's largely symbolic.
Yeah.
It's
What
symbolic.
what if an interesting discussion actually I had with some of my friends here in Canada about Canada becoming a part of the United States, and of course there were some patriots saying that oh, will never happen. They Canada's independence. Yet some others were saying that, well, it all depends. If all our Canadian dollars will be exchanged one-to-one basis for US dollars, then why not? Let's say I have $500,000 cash Canadian, and it will become instead $500,000 US money. Then, of course, I would be for Canada becoming part of the United States. And as a matter of fact, it's not a fantastic proposition because that's what happened in Germany when the West Germany recognized East Germany Deutschmarks, which were next to nothing compared to Deutschmark of West Germany. They were exchanged
Great
one
deal
to
for the
one.
great deal for the East Germans.
Yeah, absolutely.
They
And
were subsidized.
So that's not something on the border of unthinkable. That's something if Trump is preparing to pay $30 billion here and there, so okay, it will be more than $30 billion, but then he would have Canada as a 51st state, and then the United States will grow exponentially by Canada joining it. So that's not unthinkable. It just requires a little bit more of creative thinking. Well, maybe you exchange not all Canadian dollars to US, but only half. Okay, so the people said that half is okay. We will go for half. So it's all a matter of here is all the patriotic considerations or so on.
It's almost like also it'd be almost like you'd be playing a gigantic game of Monopoly with the United States.
Absolutely, do the same deal with Greenland, because it's a little bit unsatisfying thing that Trump is talking. Except we don't know whether seriously or half seriously about taking over Greenland, which is an enormous landmass and strategic landmass.
Oh yes.
So why not to make some kind of a deal with the Greenland people? And there are 55,000 people. That's all. What's the rest of it? So I think that would have been.
Well, we can't. Well, we could try arguing. It says we need living space, Lebensraum.
Exactly.
For all those illegal immigrants we want to repatriate and send them to populate Greenland. They need to fill that up and sort of spread it out a bit from the main United States to Greenland.
And pay each, say, a couple of $1,000s to settle, to get this,
get started,
and all that stuff.
Yeah. Crank up a new Greenland economy.
Yeah, so that could have been done. So I think Trump, he kind of stops halfway, but I think it's about time for him to start delivering, not only talking about something, but actually deliver that. And it seems to me.
Well, remember but they're already talking about including Canada underneath the Golden Dome. And as you and I have observed, there are certain weaknesses in the Golden Dome concept, which were revealed when I participated in a war game back in 1997, which ended up simulating a war in space. And in the war game, both sides, red and blue, were designated in that thing. Blue were the good guys, and red represented Russia. And a whole bunch of other states and organizations were represented by different colors. But you had satellites on both sides, in space, and both were capable of using laser weapons in space. Now, we discovered that what happens when you do that, when you have satellites versus satellites in low Earth orbit, you have created an unstable hair trigger situation in Earth orbit. In effect, a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit, in which the side that fires first has a decisive advantage. And in the war game, red fired first, and it did not turn out well for blue, the good guys.
Yeah.
And they recognize, and eventually they tried to restart the war game and say, oh well, the red strikes weren't as effective as advertised. And then the red guy,
I want my money back.
Yeah, I want my money back. Let's restart this. And so they restarted it because a lot of contracts were at stake based on the results of this war game. So they restarted it, and the red president was furious, and I was a member of the red team. And so I went to, he said, what can we do about this? So I went to our ASAT guys, our anti-satellite guys. I said, how many ASAT weapons do we have left? Oh, about 30. I said, oh, good. I recommend let's put them in low Earth orbit. Put nuclear warheads on all of them. So we did. And red ended up detonating all of those satellites in low Earth orbit at once. And when you do that, you get lots of electromagnetic pulse.
Yep.
Which essentially destroyed, in the war game, the entire global space infrastructure. And it created an event that the war game could not simulate. It basically collapsed the entire global economic infrastructure. And the war game organizers recognized that the nuclear attacks in space took us back to before 1950 in terms of technology. and they recognized how catastrophic it would be. And this, if these results eventually filtered outward to the open press, and people like Donald Rumsfeld started warning of a potential Pearl Harbor in space. And this was decades ago. But the lessons have been forgotten. They've been overlooked, because people's, their memory, their collective memory doesn't go back to 1997 or results of war games. They don't learn the lessons of those war games.
So we are here to remind of this.
I'm here to remind them of the lessons of history. Don't forget.
Yeah.
Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself. It does rhyme, though. And so you have to be careful. And that is why when I look at the Golden Dome and I see what they say they want to achieve, what my goal would be to remind them is, you don't want the Golden Dome to become the 21st century version of the Maginot Line.
Yes.
Because the French spent, as you recall, the French spent billions of dollars, billions of francs, the modern day equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars, to construct the Maginot Line. They made a heavy line across the French-German border, the heaviest fortifications, and light defensive works across the French-Belgian border and Luxembourg, light, not fully developed, just light fortifications. And they thought that would be sufficient. And what they did not realize is that the Germans were observing this, and they found a way to bypass it. They went through the Ardennes, and and it resulted in the defeat of France and a very long war.
Do you remember when Germany capitulated and they were signing the peace treaty? So there were, of course, Germans, there were Russians, U.S.,
Yes.
England, and
Yes.
France. And the German general says, "Oh, did we lose to France as well?" Before signing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now there was a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Oh, we lost to you?
Oh, we lost to France? I didn't know that. Now, what's interesting is that certain today's Maginot Lines is being done by northern NATO countries from Finland to Baltic republics and Poland. They're now building extreme fortifications, including mines for to avoid Russian aggression. And a lot of people, especially like I visited Poland just a few weeks ago, and they're taking Russian threat very, very seriously.
Mhm.
They have now, based on Israeli strategy, they're taking all people, reserves. A friend of mine's son-in-law, 53 years old, he was called for 3 weeks duty for training and retraining. And so they are taking, unlike others, the Russian threat very, very seriously. However, in the meantime, Putin always refers to, we have to think about realities on the front lines. Now, what are realities on the front lines is that they are spending weeks and months taking some kind of village of 300 people, and they're losing 1,500 people a day. They're not making any progress at all.
And they're not getting a good return on investment either.
No. And it's
If you're losing five times the enemy's losses in terms of your own losses, that is definitely not conducive to wearing the enemy down. You're wearing yourself down more.
even if you consider high fertility of Russian women, but the problem is that it will take at least 18 months until whatever they will produce will become of serving age. So this is kind of a rather slow process, and I don't know if Russians have a way to speed it up somehow. But
Either that or lower the draft age
yeah, well,
down into the teenagers.
or to create, remember Hitlerjugend? So it will be
Yes.
Jugend when 10 years old, 12 years old guys will start fighting on the front lines. Well, at least now they have supply of Koreans. So Ukrainian meat grinder now has two sorts of meats.
New material, variety.
It's coming in new material.
You just might as well call it the Ukrainian Cuisinart.
It's a really pathetic
It
situation. So
is.
I don't understand. When Trump is giving Putin all the inducement to come to the peace talks, I
Because
can't understand Putin's.
but again, it has not yet fully he does not yet fully appreciate that he and Putin are trying to are arguing with different kinds of currency. Trump believes in a traditional currency, monetary gain, and Putin's currency is the currency of power.
Now, interestingly enough, Trump is getting a little bit more aggressive towards Putin lately. And remarkable situation was when Putin offered his help to regulate situation with Iran. And Trump told him, you know what, I don't need your help with Iran. I need your help with Russia. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Putin, I think, is also starting to realize, especially what the US did in Iran, that situation may be not so funny anymore. Maybe it's about time to really come with some goods on the table. It's all this talking is no longer serves him really well because he cannot make any progress on the front lines. And Ukrainians, I think their strategy is very, very thoughtful about to exhaust Russian army, liquidate as many Russian attackers as possible. And there is one blogger in Ukraine, former Colonel Svitan, and his position is very simple. Territory is secondary. The most important thing is liquidation of invaders. And once you liquidate enough invaders, the territory will come back to you just
Yeah,
itself.
no, it makes perfect sense. And the thing is, the longer they can resist the Russians successfully, the greater will be the Russian difficulties once the war actually stops, because then their demographic problems kick in, their economic recovery problems kick in, their internal political problems become a lot worse, as you mentioned before, when all those those armed Russian soldiers come back into Russian society and discover that everything's a mess, and then you would have a prolonged period of recuperation and recovery from the stresses of an unsuccessful war. So
And I remember just the end of the war of Russia against Afghanistan when the war was over. I think it was 1989 when
yes,
all troops were gone from Afghanistan. And they were prized in Russian society. They were despised by civilians, and eventually they organized in bands and they started to
well,
attack civilians.
and in the way again at the end of the Vietnam War, a lot of returning U.S. Vietnam veterans recall, how what bad treatment they received from from a lot of the American public. They were not they did not appreciate or fully
Yeah.
appreciate, and a lot of Vietnam veterans remember that quite well, and they've gotten over it for the most part, but they have not forgotten it.
So when Russians will start coming back from Ukraine, they're not going to be treated as the war heroes.
Nope.
Oh, they're losers.
Mhm.
So now, in the Russian army, at least they were getting decent salaries for fighting. And now they're coming back. There are no jobs at all in Russia. Not good jobs or bad jobs. There are simply no jobs. So, what do you think these people coming back with the weapons? What do you think they're going to do?
They'll turn into bandits.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is maybe another reason why maybe if U.S. will take over Greenland, maybe they will offer Russians to send their troops to Greenland and trying to absorb them in the economy of Greenland. Who knows? Maybe that will be a way out for Putin.
Or at least employ the Russians as law enforcement people.
Yeah. And the Russians are used to a cold climate, so they will feel at home in Greenland.
There you go.
And maybe make well, in this case, if there will be so many Russians, they will have to make some kind of Russian as a second language in Greenland, so the people will feel they're at home. And if that will happen, a lot of Russian civilians will make applications to immigrate to Greenland.
This gets really complicated.
It is, yeah, it could be quite complicated.
Yeah.
Well, in the meantime, so support for Ukraine is getting wider and wider, and all Europeans, especially members of the NATO, they all for increased help, and it's not just talk; it's a real help, real numbers. Countries like Denmark, they are starting joint ventures with Ukrainians to produce weapons like drones, for example.
Yeah.
And, I think Germany's Rheinmetall is quite active now in Ukraine and getting some shops there.
And the beautiful thing about drones and the technology and the relative simplicity of producing drones is that smaller nations in NATO can actually produce drones on their own and contribute to the overall production, and the Ukrainians can certainly use them. So this is all to the good. And as we've discussed earlier, that the opportunity for a decisive counterstroke on Ukraine's part against Russia. We've discussed how the Crimea is the true center of gravity strategically of this war. And Western analysts are increasingly recognizing this, and there has been more attention devoted recently to the importance of the Kerch Bridge, and it's important to get Russian reinforcement and logistics, and that's the single main artery. If the Russians lose that artery, then the Russian occupiers of Crimea are isolated, and if they are isolated, then they are vulnerable to whatever strategic reserve the Ukrainians may have prepared for a potential counteroffensive into Crimea to force the surrender of the isolated Russian occupiers. Now is becoming, in my opinion, a very real possibility and opportunity for Ukraine to force a peace in their favor.
Yeah, interestingly enough, Russians still cannot kick out Ukrainians from Kursk region. Ukrainians are still there. They're fighting, and even with the help of North Korean forces, Russians are helpless to take complete control of Kursk region. They cannot do that.
And that in turn is a reflection of the overall logistical weakness of Russia's military. I mean, we know from history that Russia has never been very good at logistically supporting its forces adequately. They weren't good at it in World War I. They certainly weren't good at it in World War II until the United States began supplying Ford trucks.
Absolutely.
And then they had the ability to drive the German army out of the Soviet Union because finally they had the logistical capability to support it. But even so now that they don't have that handy help from the United States and they have to do this on their own, okay, so now the Russians are supplying their offensives with what? Donkeys?
Donkeys now becoming a national symbol of Russian logistics.
Yeah, that's basically it. And so, you're not going to defeat the Ukrainian armed forces, which arguably have a better logistic system, partially aided by the fact that they are on defense and not trying to prosecute an offense, but also they do in fact have a better logistical system, even for supplying defense and certainly for supplying a counterattack. So, and the West, all the NATO nations are giving the Ukrainians all the material help that they will need. And it's just up to the Ukrainians to know how to use all those separate pieces cleverly. And they have shown that they have the cleverness and the ability to adapt and organize all this material into an effective military machine. So this is great.
Actually, Jonathan, I was thinking about something that U.S. trucks, they were part of a Lend-Lease program. And supposedly after the war was over, all these trucks should have been returned to the United States. However, being born and raised in Odessa, in Ukraine, I remember that in 60s, on the streets of Odessa, there were hundreds of Studebackers still serving and still doing fantastic job. So what's happened?
Well, yeah. Well, keep in mind that U.S. auto construction was much more robust and less. It was less complex. Automobiles were less complex than they are today in the 21st century.
Of
More,
course.
ironically, the more complex that U.S. auto technology becomes, the more prone it is to to have it to needing of occasional maintenance, more frequent maintenance for the high technology parts, not necessarily the basic structure. So now you have again a very interesting situation where the even if once the Ukrainians are able to retake the Crimea, and I'm saying when, not if, because the trends are all pointing in that direction. So when the Ukrainians eventually do retake the Crimea, you and I will be able to say, "We told you first. We told you so. We told you so, but you didn't believe us. We told you this was going to happen, but no, you all wanted to be safe."
Well, the situation this week was very, very positive for Ukraine. I
Yes.
think in the next few days, weeks, we will have even more positive developments for Ukraine.
Well, the Russian offensive in Sumy apparently has been stopped dead in its
Yeah,
tracks.
yeah, yeah.
That's another hopeful sign. So instead of this fearsome Russian summer offensive, which supposedly should favor the Russians, but no, now they got stopped dead in their tracks by the Ukrainians, which again opens up the Russians to a successful counteroffensive by Ukraine. There you go.
And remember, there is a lot of unhappiness in the Russian forces that when started this talks between Putin or his representatives and U.S. And there was a hope that the peace agreement of some sort, or the ceasefire, will happen real time soon. So a lot of Russians signed for army services because they were getting upfront 2, sometimes 3 million rubles. So they were saying, okay, so we'll grab 2-3 million rubles. The peace will be arranged, ceasefire at least, and we will have the money. We will come back to our homes, and life is beautiful. Now, that didn't happen. So a lot of these people realize now that they, in fact, could be killed and will never see this 2-3 million rubles. So they are very unhappy about it and very reluctant for fighting Ukrainians because they know that there's a great likelihood that they will become part of the sort of participating in meat attacks where they use tactics when they send 100 people, 90 killed, 10 remain, so they send another 90 people to join 10 survivors, and here is another meat attack. And sometimes they have several meat attacks a day with very predictable results. So this is really incredible. Yeah, but Ukraine is getting stronger and stronger, and I think if Zelensky will arrange a few brigades in reserve
Yes.
and will attack Crimea and some other, I think they will use it will come to it, some decoy attacks maybe around Sum, Donetsk.
They could do a diversionary offensive in the east,
Absolutely.
draw the Russians' attention, and then then employ their main punch. They would employ their main punch against Crimea, presumably right after they have successfully collapsed the Kerch Bridge. That would be the key event that you would be looking for the start of a offensive against Crimea, because you don't want the Russians reinforcing or resupplying Crimea while you're busy trying to retake it. You want it to drop out of control, and then after the Russians have surrendered, then the Ukrainians from their side can begin resupplying and restoring Crimea to full operational capability.
And only then Ukraine can come back to the idea that the war is over, where the all Ukrainian territory as it was in 1991, all will be freed from the Russians. So that
And the European Union, remember the European Union sanctions, they've taken the position that those sanctions will not be lifted until Russia has withdrawn from all of Ukraine.
exactly, and new sanctions are now being prepared, and the Europeans are urging US to join these sanctions as well. And well, probably Trump is going to give Putin a little bit more time as he usually does, but we'll see. Maybe this time it's different. We'll see about that. Jonathan, thank you very much for today's program. And I'll finish that with glory to Ukraine.
God bless America.
God bless America, absolutely, and Canada as well.
There you go. Yeah. Because after all, Canada may become the 51st state, and then they get their
So
own.
glory to both US and Canada. And
Really, exactly.
thank you so much, and see you next week, same place, same time. Bye bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.